Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe. Hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon. If you haven't been able to tell yet, my voice is a little bit raspy today. My wife and I are both dealing with probably bronchitis, picked up from our daughter's school. It's always fun having children. But if you are tuning live here on Behance, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. We've got Nicolette from the Netherlands, finally able to catch another masterclass. Great to see you. Zara and Philip and Wade and Drew and Laura and Jack. Awesome. Hope you're all excited for masterclass number 94. It's going to be a fairly chill masterclass today. I can't get too excited because my throat is just killing me. I'm going to be taking a few days off next week to rest up and focus on me, which is, I haven't taken a single day off since, well, Adobe gives us days off, which is wonderful to focus on our mental health and stuff like that. But I haven't taken an actual PTO day off since I've joined Adobe 3 years ago. So it's going to be nice to just kind of relax for a little bit. All right, let's go ahead and hop over to my screen and we're going to get going. So if anyone has questions throughout this masterclass, definitely throw it in the chat. I will be taking a peek from time to time. We've got Stone Cedar from Mississippi or Iowa on the Mississippi River. Exciting. Wenda, great to see you. And Mushimi, great to see all of you. All right, so we're going to go ahead and create a landing page today. Nothing too crazy, and if we get through this, we'll definitely move on to something else. But I did post something to this effect a few days ago, because a while back, I think a few weeks ago, someone posted something about the Monument Extended typeface and how it's the big thing these days in the Web 3 world. And I did see a lot of responses to that particular tweet that someone posted, that the Monument Extended typeface is fairly pricey to license. And, it's a very nice typeface. So, depending on the license that you need, it can get pretty pricey. Here is the official Monument Extended typeface. It's from Pangram Foundry. Pangram, there you go. Game 7, indeed, Megan, indeed. Although I wish, my wife's a Kings fan, so Oilers, Kings, but Leafs, I wish we didn't have to get to a Game 7. I wish we ended it last night, but it's what we do. And I'm not looking forward to it. I just hope this is finally the season we get past the first round. Anyways, enough of hockey talk. So, Monument Extended, obviously a fantastic typeface, but for licensing, for commercial purposes, even though it says starting at $30, if you're looking for, print licensing or web licensing for a large number of people, it gets a little bit pricier. However, what I was able to do is I was able to go on Adobe Fonts and find something very similar. There's a halogen typeface. So if you're on any sort of Creative Cloud plan, you have access to Adobe Fonts, and the halogen typeface is almost identical. It's not exactly, but Monument, right? So it's very similar to Monument Extended. So if you're on Adobe Fonts and you are not able to license Monument Extended, the official one, halogen is a pretty good alternative, right? So definitely keep that in mind. And we're going to be using that in today's masterclass. All right. So again, this is what we're going to be designing, something similar. We're going to start with a fairly basic version and then move our way on to this one over here. All right. Adobe XD. So we're going to go ahead, because this is a web-based landing page, we're going to start with a web preset. 1920 by 1080 should work. Well, we could always go down to 1366 or 1280 as well, but we're going to start with 1920. We're going to start nice and large. And what we want to do is we're going to be blocking things out. So at the top, we're going to want our navigation bar. And this is usually how I start a project behind the scenes when I'm not streaming my masterclass and trying to shove things in as much as possible. But, in this one, it's a very chill masterclass. So do I even think I have the music on? I don't know if you can all hear the music in the background, but I think it's on there. But usually what I'll do is I'll just start blocking things out. So I'll put a rectangle at the top, and I'll basically tell myself that this is where the navigation bar is going to go. And if I want to get really kind of into the nitty gritty, and so Philip is asking about the Adobe Starter Plan. So the Adobe Starter Plan is still there. There were some changes to it, I believe. Definitely, if you're having issues still accessing the Starter Plan, hit up Adobe Care on Twitter, twitter.com/Adobe Care. They'll walk you through it. But the plan is still there. There's just something in the way, or something was changed. But definitely hit up Adobe Care, and they'll be able to walk you through that. So if I really want to kind of dive a little bit deeper into the mock-up phase, what I would typically do is, instead of just a long rectangle across the top, I would just break it up into sections, right? So maybe the logo will go here, and then maybe there might be a search bar, and then there might be maybe some text links, right? And then a button over here. Something to that extent, right? When you're mocking things up, you don't necessarily have to get super fancy. You don't have to use text. Sometimes it might help, because you might look at this and think, well, I don't really understand what that is. But if you're mocking up for yourself, you should probably have a pretty good idea as to what all these bits and bobs are, right? All right, so we've got our rectangles looking pretty good. And then, down here, we're gonna probably want a header, maybe some body copy, and some buttons as well. And you could definitely, just like we did, block things out again. So we might want maybe a 2-line header. And I might want to actually move some of these in, maybe to start to find some. Let's go with, we'll just go with 100, even though it's not on the 8-pixel grid. We're going to run with it. Again, today's if anyone's just joining, I am a little bit under the weather this week, so it's a bit of a more chill masterclass, right? So we might do something like that. This might be our header, and we're going to replace all this with actual copy and stuff in just a moment. And then we might have our, what we can do? We can just do a big block for the header, and then body copy, and then we might have some buttons, right? 1 button and 2 buttons, right? And then over to the right, we may want some sort of a large image to showcase maybe some art on this particular. Yeah, Samuel's saying I sound ill. I am. I have, my wife and I have bronchitis, which is not fun, but we picked it up from our daughter's school. And I was explaining earlier, it's, always, it's what you get when you have children. They have germs all over the place in their school, and they bring it home to us. They're present to us, right? So this is what I would typically do when I'm first starting out, building out a landing page, or basically anything, is just really kind of block things out, see if things make sense, see if I want more padding at the top, or, something like that. And I probably do in this case, right? And then if I am working with a client, I would definitely send this over to them, figure out if this is kind of the direction they're going with. Very simple. I would probably add a little bit more color, or a little bit more context in this case, but kind of happy with how things are looking here. Obviously not very exciting, but what we're able to do now is, let's go ahead and create one more artboard, and then we can kind of build upon this. You don't have to start too fancy. So in the, slightly higher resolution or higher fidelity landing page, what we're probably going to want to do is darken that background. So I'm going to just do something fairly simple right now. I'm going to do a nice dark blue in this area here. And for the navigation bar at the top, we're going to do a very simple logo. I'm actually, just so I don't waste too much time, I'm going to steal a logo from another document, paste it in here, and we have our logo. Look at that, magic, right? Martha Stewart moment. So we have our logo, and then beside that, we're going to want our search bar. So with the rectangle, I'm just going to draw one out. And I always like taking a look at the preview from time to time, or putting it on another display, just so I can kind of see it back and forth as I'm designing, just to make sure things are not looking too large or too small. Maybe I'll round out the corners just a little bit. Maybe we'll go 8 possibly. Might be a bit too small, but we'll see. Now we probably don't want the search bar to stand out too much. Doesn't look too bad, but I might want to go a little bit darker. So let's go in that same range, but bring it up a little bit, so it still has a little bit of blue in there. And then I'm going to add a little bit of a border. I usually, when I'm working with darker elements, I like to add a white border and then drop the opacity, just so if I do have a little bit of color in there, it does help bring that color through. Maybe around 8 or 10, something in that range. Might definitely tweak that later. And then on the inside, we're going to want our search icon and then some text over to the right. Now we can hop over to our plugins panel, and then we have our icons for design plugin installed. Let's go ahead and type out something like search. There's some pretty nice icons here, but I can also open up Nucleo, which I use fairly often in these master classes. And as a reminder, it's a third-party icon manager. I have a lot of icon sets that I license from various places that are all kind of managed in here. So I can type out, excuse me, something like search again. There's some pretty good ones. Sometimes you can also type out like magnify. Some icon sets, label their icons a little bit differently. So you might have to search for a few different things, but something simple like this. We'll probably do this from Omni, or this one's kind of fun here. It's a little bit different. This one's from the Unicon set, where this one kind of has a fun look to it. This is from Coco. Maybe I'll copy that one and pop that in there. Where did it go? There we go. And depending on the icons that you're using, some will be fill-based, some will be border-based. In some cases, I prefer the border-based icons, only because it allows me to control the thickness very easily. But even on the fill-based icons, if, in this one here, if I want it a little bit thicker, I can always add a border to it, basically have a border that's the same color, right? So it's not the same, but it's, it'll get me there. That could potentially work. And then over to the right, we're going to want our search text, right? So I'll just go ahead and type out, let me zoom out here so we can all see what we're doing. Collectible is with an A or an I? I think it's an I. Actually, I think you can do it either way, but we're going to run with that. Now, typeface, we're going to kind of go back and forth on a few different typefaces here, but the one that we're going to be using for the body copy, I've been using it quite a bit lately. It's Astoria, and that's also from Adobe Fonts. And we're going to go nice and small with this one, about 14, and then we can probably keep it at white, just so it's nice and accessible up here. And what's nice about Astoria, they also have Astoria Sans right over here. But it's got some nice elements to it. It's not crazy like a display typeface, which we're going to be using for the header possibly. But it's got some nice elements to it, and it's fairly easy to read, right? That could work. All right. Roman or medium. Medium might be a bit too. Yeah, I think medium's a bit too thick, but that will do. And if I need to, if the letters are a little bit too spaced together, I can pump them up a little bit. All right. So we have our search bar, and I'm going to make sure to group these elements, call this search. That's looking pretty good. And then over to the right, we might want some text links. Now, depending on the landing page you're designing, you may want one text link, you may want several text links. We're going to put maybe a few up here. We'll start with one. We'll see what that looks like. And this might just be a link to our marketplace, right? So we can bump this up a little bit to about 16. And here with the text links, we could possibly bump up the weight as well. Now, you have to keep in mind when you're designing landing pages like this, is there may be a slight difference between the active landing page or the landing page that you're on and landing pages that you are not on. So if you are, if you're creating a difference from using just like text weights, again, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit under the weather today, so I can't speak very well. What you'll want to do, you'll want to usually create like a 2-weight difference. So if you have medium on the non-active pages, you'll want to go something like extra bold on the active one, just so that you can really see the difference. Whereas if I go just bold, there's a difference, but it's not as easy to see, right? So I would probably go down to either regular, in this case it's called Roman on this one, right? So you can kind of see a nice difference over there. You want to make sure it's really easy to tell which links are which. And then for this one, there might be possibly, a down arrow, or, to activate a hover effect, for example, right? So I'm going to activate my square grid, just create a very quick arrow. Of course, I can use an icon if I wanted to. Bump that up a little bit in weight, or a lot. That might be a bit too large. Actually, it's not too bad. Might want to round out the caps. Let's see, bump that down a touch. It's not too bad. Again, this is kind of why I usually open up the preview window fairly often. When you're designing zoomed in, everything looks great. Then you bump that up, or open up that window. That's a bit better. Okay, we're gonna leave it at that. I'm gonna group these, call this links. And then finally, way over to the right-hand side, we may want another button. Now things are looking fairly small right now, so I'm probably gonna squeeze things in a little bit. We can definitely have some nice margins on the side. We don't need to squish everything on the left and right. Right up there. We can also place all of these into a group and call this, let's say, nav. I'm going to turn a stack on, and this will allow me, if I wanted to maybe extend the width of the search bar, I can just bring that out, and the text links over to the right will adjust accordingly. And we can also create a stack out of this as well. Now, if we were to just select the links group, this one over here, and then turn a stack on, it's going to create a stack with both of these individual objects. I actually want this to be one object. So if I dive in here, I'm going to group these, call this marketplace, and then if I turn a stack on, I can now duplicate like this, right? And here, this one, I probably don't need a down arrow in that case. Maybe there's artists, and then ungroup that. And then there might be trending, collections. And then from the group level, I can increase the padding in between each object. And let's try about 40, see what that looks like. Maybe we could probably go a little bit higher, 48 or 56. That's not too bad. I think that could work. And then over to the right, we're going to want our button, right? A little bit larger. Let's go about 48. Now I'm not too concerned about the width because we could use padding on this to automatically adjust the button as we design. Now in this first version, we're going to keep it fairly simple. So we'll just do a little bit of a darker version. We can also use similar colors to our button over here, but we're going to do a nice dark blue, very similar to the background, and then we're going to use a border to kind of separate it. Again, white, drop the opacity. In the next version that we're going to be, the next revision that we're going to be working on, it's going to be a lot more bright and colorful. Let's go ahead and... Philip is asking, how long do you work on a project before the masterclass so you're ready to show it? It really depends. Sometimes I just whip things together in a few hours. Sometimes it'll be a kind of a... So this one in particular, let me go back over to Safari for a second. This one in particular, it is a little bit of a revision from something I created a few months ago. I just this down at the bottom, you might recognize it from an older project. But sometimes it's a few hours, sometimes it could take a few days, and sometimes it's something I've been working on and off over the course of a few weeks or months. It really does depend. Yeah, but sometimes it's not last minute because I'm procrastinating, just last minute because maybe I get a new idea earlier in the week and I figured, you know what, let's just do that for a masterclass. It could be kind of fun, right? All right, so here, this one will be a button to maybe connect a wallet, for example. So inside, we're going to just write out connect wallet, and we're going to use the same Astoria typeface, but we're going to be bumping up the weight maybe to bold. We'll try bold and see what that looks like, because this will be a call to action. And now we want to, excuse me. we definitely want this button to enlarge as the text inside of it is changed. So what we're going to do is we're going to select both these elements, pop them into a group. I'll call this button. Hey Vipin, great to see you. I haven't seen you in quite a while. And then over within the properties inspector, we're going to turn on padding, where we can adjust the padding over here. So we're going to do, let's say 16. Oops. 16 and 16. That could potentially work. We might want to go bump up a little bit more on the sides. 24. Yeah, I think that could work. And we're also going to want, when the button is changed, we don't want necessarily to kind of overflow to the right. We want it to move over to the left. So with the text layer selected, I'm going to make sure that it's aligned to the right. That way, if I change it, hello, right? It kind of resizes in that direction, which is great. All right, so we have our navigation bar looking pretty good. I'm going to make sure to place the button inside there. Now, what you're going to notice is because we have the navigation bar as a stack, right? We have a stack enabled on that group. If I place this button into that group, it's going to pop it over, and I place it at the top, so it pops it over down that way. But if I pop it down at the bottom, right, where did it go? Oh, I moved it outside. But if I move it down here, right, I would have to manually kind of move this over, which isn't the worst thing in the world, but because I want that to kind of be anchored over to the right at all times, I'm going to leave it outside of that navigation group, just like that. Samuel is asking, what about if the menu should hover? Can you make component inside of a stack? So it's a very good question. You can. However, when you're designing and this is kind of one of the reasons why we don't really have elements kind of work as a stack in a prototype automatically, because it just causes a little bit of problems. But when you're designing, it's going to kind of push things around. But when you go back to the main component, and maybe I'll show you that. Actually, let's just dive into that as a quick example, right? So here we have obviously this link, right? And we want this to have a hover effect. Now, if I were to grab my rectangle and draw one out, things are kind of moving around and things are wonky. It's definitely not what we want. Now, if I go inside of the marketplace group, we'll be able to do this. But once I get to the left or the right, it's going to start pushing things around again, right? Obviously not what we want. So there are two solutions. The first solution is to turn the stack off, which in some cases completely fine, but in some cases you may want the stack to remain on. The second solution is to create the component and then kind of ignore the fact that things are moving around on the hover effect. So here's what we're going to do. So with marketplace, the group selected, I'm going to create a component, Command and Control K, or you can do that within the properties inspector over to the right, or your document assets. And then what we want to do is want to create a hover effect. So I'm going to go ahead and press the plus button, and I'm going to create a hover effect or hover state, right? And then with that done, I'm going to dive into my component, and let's go ahead and do something like this, right? Now what you're noticing, again, like I mentioned, things are moving around because it's inside of a stack. And like I mentioned earlier, try to ignore that, right? Even though it's kind of annoying to see those things move around, the hover effect is only going to take place within a prototype, right? So just to kind of show you how that works, I'm going to switch back to the default state. Everything looks great, right? In the hover state, everything does not look great. But you're not going to really see that in the prototype. So if I go ahead and press the play button at the top and then hover, right, everything looks fine. Because the prototypes do not, the stacks do not affect prototypes automatically. And again, that's one of the reasons why it doesn't, because some things would just kind of explode. So that's kind of how you would work around that. So in design mode, it's going to look a little bit funky if stacks are enabled, but in prototype mode, everything will look great, right? Hopefully that answered your question. All right, Mohammed is asking, I need to ask something. How could we price our work with clients? When we're designing for the web or mobile, I suggest if we have can deal with clients, we get creative briefs, right? I mean, that's a massive question, and I'm probably not the right person to ask because I haven't dealt with an actual design client in quite a few years. Maybe in the chat, maybe there's some people in here who work with clients on a regular basis that would give a much better answer than me. It also, drastically depends on where you live and a lot of different factors. So maybe in the chat, some people can chime in and they might have some suggestions. All right. Now, down below, now we have our navigation bar in place, we're going to want our text. So we want our header, and we might want some body copy and maybe some additional buttons. Now, our header, we're going to be using that halogen typeface that we saw earlier on Adobe Fonts. So I might want to type out something like discover and collect, right? That might be the first line. And of course, depending on your header, you can put this all in one text layer if you wanted to. I'm going to make this nice and large. I might also want to pull this back a little bit. And I'm going to switch over to the halogen typeface. Now for the first line, I kind of want to really emphasize, one part of this this header, right? There's going to be two digital. Delios is probably not an actual word, but we're going to run with it. So on this first one, I might want to maybe drop this to about regular. And then this one here, I might want to really bump it up to about black, possibly, right? Something like that. Oh yeah, Sturfy is saying the Office series, which is probably not referring to the Office on NBC, which was a great show. But I believe Office Hours with Andrew and Nick, which takes place, I think it's still on Fridays, right? That's a great series to watch here on Behance, because Andrew and Nick deal with clients all the time. They are freelance. Actually, Andrew now works with Adobe, but they do a lot of freelance work. So they definitely have a lot more experience than I do dealing with clients. I haven't dealt with a client in a long time, which I miss, but also, it's nice sometimes not to worry about things like that. All right, so we have our header looking okay. I might want to bump this up. Oh, it's not too bad. We're going to run with it. And then down below, we're going to grab our text tool again, and we're going to drag one out. Now, as I start typing our description, right, going to be a little bit too large, so we definitely want to adjust this a little bit. Now, what we can do is we could definitely drop this down in size a bit, but because we still have the halogen typeface selected, right, it becomes a little bit more difficult to read as it gets smaller. It's not terrible. It's not, a serif typeface with lots of stuff going on. It works, but I think I might want to go back to the Astoria typeface, just so we have something a little bit simpler. Now there is the Astoria Sans typeface, so it's still kind of in that Astoria family. It just doesn't have that fancy elegance to it. So this could potentially work, right? And of course, we'll probably want to drop the weight a little bit as well to maybe Roman. Hey Matt, great to see you. Matt says, I love watching your streams just to see what cool fonts you are going to introduce me. Yeah, I spend way too much time on websites like Adobe Fonts, just browsing fonts, right? There's great font packs, there's foundries, there's recommendations. And actually one thing that's really interesting. So if you're working on a project and you're going to be using, let's say, the halogen typeface that we're using for your headers, right? If you scroll down, there is not only recommendations that show fonts that are similar to halogen, which is also nice if you want something a little bit different but also kind of the same. But if you scroll down even further, there are font pairings, and this is really cool. So this will show you, halogen for your header, and it even highlights it right here at the top, right, as you highlight over it. But it also shows you kind of what might go with it down below for body copy. Because like I was showing, you might use something really extravagant for the header, but when you make that really small for the body copy, it becomes a little bit difficult to read. So this one, it's saying halogen, black, oblique for the header, but down below, this Forma DJR micro medium, that's quite the name, for the body copy, right? So there's a lot of really interesting. Now this one is almost like Comic Sans, so I'd probably stay away from that one. but Informa Pro for the body, not too bad in that case. So Adobe Fonts has a lot of really interesting features, aside from the fact that you can just browse fonts for hours and hours and hours, which I do occasionally because I love switching up my typefaces from time to time. It's a weird hobby of mine. But anyways, let's go ahead and type something out here. I don't know if you can hear the clickety clacking of my keyboard. Maybe some of you like it, maybe some of you hate it. There we go. Vipin is saying, I still hope you start your stream with the rectangle tool. Basically, I do. Basically, every stream I start with the rectangle tool. All right, let's go ahead and bump up the line height. Let's try about 40. That's not too bad, right? Another typeface I was considering is the Open Sans typeface, which is very similar, right? It's so interesting because Open Sans, Astoria. Open Sans, Astoria. Both of them are very similar, clean typefaces. And bouncing back to Adobe Fonts one more time, if I go to all fonts, and then there is a clean section or a clean tag right over here, and you're going to find a ton of fonts and typefaces that look very similar. Basics. Oh, I was like, why does it say boot book? Because that's what I put into the sample text. But you're going to, New Hero, Basic Sans, Droid Sans. A lot of these are so similar, but they have very small differences that may completely change how your project looks. Another one is, I think, New Order, right? It's a little bit slightly more futuristic, but it's still, very similar, very basic, and it's a nice typeface, right? But I think Astoria Sans could work in this case. And then down below, we're going to want our buttons. And here we might want two different buttons. One main call to action and one secondary call to action. This is a good opportunity to use components. So I'm going to start with a simple button. And this one might be the main call to action on the entire landing page. So we're going to probably want, something that really stands out. And we might want to go for maybe a fun gradient in this case, right? So on the left-hand side, it might be maybe a bluish, something like that. And then maybe it'll transition to, there we go. And speaking of colors, I know a lot of you have asked me throughout the years about colors. How do you choose colors? What are the good colors to use? Can you show us some gradients and that sort of thing? Let me see if I can find it. I don't have it right here, but I did tweet out a preview of something I'm working on, all about colors. I'm working on a whole library. Let's see if we can find it. It wasn't too long ago, so here we go. So here's a bit of a preview of something I'm working on. I'm working on a massive library of colors with some fun names because, it's always fun to name your colors from time to time, but it's going to be available as a Creative Cloud library and an Adobe XD document. It's also going to have a nice series of gradients, and gradients are really interesting. Some of them, like this one here, Morning Sunrise, you probably wouldn't use very often in a UI and UX project, right? Because it's a very drastic gradient, but then there's some very subtle ones, like this Clear Skies Ahead one, where it's kind of like a darker blue to a lighter blue, but very subtle. And gradients I love working with gradients because it allows you to kind of make your design pop a little bit, but at the same time, it just, if it's done right, it just brings this nice elegance to your project. So this is only a very small sample of the colors that I'm working on, as you can see here on the left-hand side. And they're all named and they're all clever, and some of them are clever, but it's going to be a fun project. All right. Oh, wow. Wade found it already. You are fast. I did see a question come through, I think. I think I may have missed. If I missed your question and I haven't answered it yet, definitely throw it in there again and I'll take a look. All right. So this button might say Explore. Now, here's another conundrum you might deal with. Once you get to the buttons, your thought might be, okay, well, using Astoria for the body copy, using Halogen for the header, probably makes sense to stick with Astoria here, right? And for the most part, it probably would. But for buttons, you might be able to get away, depending on the typeface, you might be able to get away with your header typeface, right? So in this case, let's try halogen. Let's see what that looks like, right? Maybe I will bump it up to about bold. Maybe. It's a little bit too wide. Now, of course, what we can do is we can bring back our letter spacing. I don't know. What do you all think? Is it too wide? Will it work? I think it could potentially work. Maybe I'll drop this down to medium. I think it might be too large too. I don't know. I think it could work. I think it might be okay. So let's go ahead and place this into a group for now. Now, I'm not going to enable padding on these buttons, only because, you know, if we do have two buttons here, and I'll show you an example of this in a moment, but if we have two buttons here, you know, these are both call to actions, even though one's primary, one's secondary. We want these buttons to be the same size, right? So if this one was like hello or hi or whatever it might be, right? We want them to kind of both have the same weight for the user. We don't want one button to be a little bit larger than the other, because then it's kind of forcing a user to take one action over the other. Even though maybe that might be what you're doing, there are other ways to kind of convey exactly that. So we're going to keep the size the same for both these buttons. So now that I have this grouped, and of course you don't have to group it before you create a component, but I'm going to create a component inside of the properties inspector, and then we want to create another state. So I'm going to go ahead and create one more new state. This can be our outline state, or you can call it secondary, or whatever you want. And we're going to dive in here. And this one's going to be an outline state. So we're going to set a border. And maybe this one will say, you know, I'm going to go back to my default state and make sure this is centered. And this one is going to say maybe cell, right? Now, what's nice about using components and states is that if you update a property on your default state in your main component, it'll push those changes to the rest. So if I, you know, make this shape a little bit smaller, and of course, if I was using padding, I can definitely adjust the padding inside of the properties inspector, but it's going to push that change to all the other ones, right? And even if I duplicate this out, switch it over to my outline state, if I do decide to change the typeface back to, let's say, Astoria, right, it's going to push that change to the other buttons, which is great. All right, the white font on the gradient is right on the edge. Yes, Philip, I completely agree with what you just said. So Philip is saying that the white font here, right, on the gradient in the background may not pass accessibility. He says it's right on the edge. He's probably exactly right. And that's one of the tricky things about using gradients, is because, you know, if I were to simply make this button maybe solid blue, right, that would most likely pass, right? But because I have those two different blues, especially on the right-hand side, we're kind of pushing our bounds a little bit. And as you can see when I launch it, so you're absolutely right, Philip. Maybe in this case, we might want to just go with a solid color. Maybe we'll go with like a nice purple. Maybe we'll run with purple for some of this, right? There we go. And Renzo's saying, I think the font color blends with the back. Yeah, so Renzo is kind of on the same page, and I think you're all right. That's the importance of checking for accessibility. If you go to your plugins and you install a plugin called Stark, actually, let's go back. Right? Go back here. What Stark will allow you to do, you can select both of these elements and you can check for contrast, and it's probably going to yell at me. Can't check against, okay, so it doesn't check against gradients. But let's go ahead and just change this to a solid, this color here, right? Contrast checker. Ugh. There you go. It doesn't pass anything. But down here, they have some suggestions, which is nice, right? But if I go back to that purple, it probably won't be perfect, but it'll be better, right? This is more of like a blurple. Much better, right? It doesn't pass AAA 7:1, but you know, this is definitely a lot better than it was before. So very good call out, Philip and Renzo. You were absolutely right. And Samuel's asking about the rounding of the buttons because of consistency. Also a good point. And this is, you know, this is the part of the design process. You're going to go through and you're going to realize, well, things are not consistent, right? Up here, we've got a rounded button. Over here, we've got rounded corners on the search field. Down here, not round. And that's completely fine. I mean, it's not fine, but it's, you know, fine at this part of the design process. We're still kind of exploring what our website and landing page is going to look like. And because we're using components and component states, right, we can always dive in here and round out these corners. Now, I think for these buttons, I kind of like them like that without rounded corners. I love rounded corners on my buttons, but I think in this case, we're going to stick with this and see what that looks like. But you're absolutely right, Samuel. You know, do you go back and kind of pull things back here? I don't know. Or do you keep it simple? Or maybe the search field can be rounded, but maybe this button up here, maybe a bit straighter. We'll see. All right. So we've gotten, you know, this far so far. But now over to the right-hand side, we may want to highlight some art that might be available on this landing page. So we might want to create something kind of fun and fancy. And there's a few ways that we can do it. The first example is going to be just a simple kind of like a block. And the next example, we might do more of like a full width feature, right? So we might want to do something like this. And maybe to get a little bit fancier, we can maybe round out the corners. But if we were to just simply round out the corners like this, right? It looks okay, right? But it's not that fancy. We want to go a little bit fancier. So we can hold down our Alt or Option key and pull in the corners individually. So this one might be, I don't know, somewhere around 175. Probably not a great number to use, but we're going to run with it. And then the corners up here, oops, I didn't hold down my Alt or Option key. You know, might be a little bit tighter, maybe around 32. And of course, you can enter those values individually inside your properties inspector as well. And what's nice about this is we can still use this as a mask for images. So if I hop over to Finder, boop, right over here, I've got some images. I might want to grab one of them and pop that in there. Maybe to add a little bit of style to this, we might want to add a bit of a border, but not right on the outside. We might want to kind of push it out a little bit. So if I duplicate this, I can turn off the fill, add a white border, and I can pull this outwards in each direction. Now, I have talked about this before, but when you are dealing with rounded corners on two objects that are, you know, fairly close to each other, it's not usually as easy as just, you know, enlarging one of them and calling it a day, because the corners, they just don't look right here. So you'll definitely want to adjust it a little bit. This one will be about 40. This one I'm going to pull in somewhere maybe 180. And then I can just dive into the properties inspector and just fill in the rest, right? It's probably not perfect. I don't think it is perfect, but we're going to run with it. And maybe I'll just drop the opacity a little bit so it's not too strong. Something like that. So that's definitely one direction you can take with a landing page like this. A little bit simpler, right? I would probably also maybe put some sort of gradient in the background just to give it a little bit of fun and flair. But another thing you can do is you can use more of like a full width image, right? So if I duplicate this, we're going to make a few changes. And this is usually what I do in my design process. You know, I'll start out fairly simple, and then I'll start to kind of push the bounds a little bit. You know, what if I add a little bit more flair to the text? What if I add a little bit more flair to the buttons? What if I add maybe a background image or a background gradient? Then I'll have like 14 revisions, and they all kind of build upon each other. Then I can start really narrowing it down and figuring out what works and what doesn't work, right? So in this case, again, I might want a background image. So drag out a rectangle across, And if I hop over here, you know, I've got this image here, boop, pop it into place, right? And move it behind. And I can double click and make this little guy a little bit larger. And we're obviously noticing some issues that are starting to arise, and we'll definitely start tackling some of those. But all of a sudden, you know, the landing page is looking a little bit more interesting. But as you start getting a little bit fancier, you're starting to notice some problems. You know, the areas over here to the left where we have our text that needs to be readable. Some of it is not readable, right? So in this case, what I might want to do is add a little bit of a gradient so that the information on the left is a little bit easier to read. So if I duplicate this layer here, I'm going to change this over to a linear gradient, and we'll do maybe from the bottom left to somewhere around the top middle, or maybe move it over a little bit. And both these will be on the darker side. So we can do like maybe a dark, maybe add a little bit of purple in there because that is present in the image in the background. And we'll do the same color or similar color down here. But the one at the top, because we want to see that image, I'm going to drop the opacity to 0, right? So all of a sudden, if I change this and say gradient, right? All of a sudden things are becoming a little bit easier to read. Now, of course, I would dive in here and probably tweak this a little bit more. Maybe add one more stop in this area here, just to really make sure that things are nice and readable, just like that, right? So the image won't be as vibrant, but you can read it, right? And then I might want to maybe add some more flair to the text in the buttons possibly, right? Let's move this stuff down. I might want to really highlight this word here. So what we can do is let's grab a rectangle. Let's draw a nice large rectangle across. Maybe I'll rotate it a little bit. Something like this. Not a lot, but a little bit, right? And let's bring a nice splash of color to this landing page. So let's go with, it's gonna be an interesting color choice, right? Something like this. I wish I had my color library ready. I don't know what I would call this. Do I have something similar on here? Actually, it would probably be something similar to like this neon living or tranquil teal color. Something around there. So we might want to go something like this, right? Now, obviously, going back to our conversation earlier, we don't want to leave the white on the green, because if we hop over to Stark one more time, select these two elements, check contrast, and we have failed everything, right? So what we might want to do is, we've been using this purple color, and purple against green, you don't see it often, but it could potentially work if you get the right combination, right? If I pull that down a little bit into the blues, it's not bad. Now I rotated this -2. Let's also rotate this -2. It's a choice, that's for sure. But let's check contrast again. There we go, right? So again, we didn't pass AAA, which is in many cases difficult to do unless it's like black and white, right? But we passed, we passed AAA 4.5 to 1, but not 7 to 1, right? Which is, for the most part, okay. Definitely try to get all of your contrast nice and checked out, but, right? We can do something kind of fun like that. I don't know if I love it completely, but it could work. It's interesting. Fergie's saying lilac plus green is my current color obsession. Ooh, that's interesting. Lilac and green. Kind of like that. There we go. I can move this down a little bit. And definitely don't be afraid. Excuse me. Definitely don't be afraid to, break your margins a little bit. We have everything lined up kind of right down here. But for something like this, you can definitely kind of push over just a touch. And then for the buttons, we might want to, we're using this, green and purplish blue up here. We might want to do something similar in this case. So like if I if I dive into this button, I'll just sample this color, sample this over here as well. Now, because this text is not as bold as it is up here, it does become a little bit muddy. So I would probably dive back in and make this bold. Now, in many cases, I would edit the main component, but because this is more of like a completely different design, I'm just going to dive in and manually make these changes. Maybe bold, and I want to be consistent on this side here. It's interesting, right? Kind of brings a new, fresh design to this page. And I might want to do the same thing up here for this button, right? Sample that. And of course, once I really start nailing down my colors, I would hop over to my document assets, add those colors, just so that they're nice and accessible to me. All right. I'm going to place these into a group. And I'm going to turn a stack on, just so if I do need to rearrange these, I can. Or if I want to make these larger, which I might want to do. I might want to make both these larger. Now again, if I edit the main component, those will all kind of enlarge really nicely for me. And then, let's see, a little bit larger just to fill out some extra space. Perfect. And then down at the bottom, we may want to, highlight some collections that may already exist. And again, this kind of goes back to what I was talking about, possibly in the last masterclass or the one before, is when you have a landing page and there are things that exist down below that you want a user to scroll to, you kind of want to give a little bit of a preview of what those are, right? You don't want to leave it at this and then just assume a user knows that there's something down there. So we might want to kick off that section with, we'll just do something like hot collectibles. Now this will go for white, and we're going to bump this up. Now we could potentially we could potentially use the halogen typeface again for the headers of each section. Although I'm hesitant to overuse that typeface too much, right? I'm still not loving this section at the top here. So I'm thinking I'm going to go back to the Astoria. Maybe I'll set it to all caps, maybe sans. We'll see what that looks like. And then we'll start making some of the cards that are down here, right? I might want to extend this artboard down, and we're going to make one of these cards. We'll probably just make one of them before our time is up today. And we'll round out the corners a little bit. And this goes back to what Samuel was talking about earlier about consistency. Do we want to keep these corners round, or do we want to match them to the buttons? Considering they're different elements, it might be okay to mix and match a little bit, but you don't want to go too drastic with these sorts of things, right? Might want an image in here. We'll do about 16. Perfect, that looks great. Round out these just a touch. With 8 and 8, which is not great. 6 possibly. There we go. And then we're probably going to want name of the piece over here. Drop that down. Let's see what 16 looks like. Oh, that's way too small. 24. It's not too bad. I might want to push this inwards a little bit. It's a little bit too close to the edge, but we're going to leave it right around there. And then, of course, we're going to put some more information down at the bottom. But I also want a button going across here. And this is where we can potentially bring in that purple again. And we'll round out those corners just a little bit. And the background, what we could potentially do is get a little bit fancy with a background blur, possibly. But definitely, crank that blur up and then keep it fairly subtle, maybe with a bit of a border. Yeah, I don't know how much I love it, but we'll definitely experiment with it. But anyways, that's probably going to wrap things up for today. I'm going to go drink some more tea, have some chicken soup, take some more meds. Next week, I will not have a masterclass. I will be taking a few days off to rest up and recover. But a big thank you to everyone who has tuned in today. Hope you all have a great weekend. Have a great week next week. And I will see you all next time.